Greetings, everyone. This is Hands and Eyes bringing you a brief lesson from Mark's Gospel, or on Mark's Gospel. It's about the healing pattern in Mark 1 through 10. I am Mark Horn, and that's a picture of me that I approve of, sort of. I've also written a book, a commentary on the Gospel of Mark, The Victory According to Mark, an exposition of the second Gospel. Kind of confusing because my name happens to be based on the person who wrote that gospel. Anyway, does Mark have a structure? I'm going to argue that it does, and it's based on how Mark tells and what he tells about and what kind of stories he tells about the healing miracles. Notice that Mark's miracle healing stories are only of one person. No pairs of demoniacs, that means demon-possessed people. No pairs of blind men like we have in Matthew's gospel. No group of 10 lepers like we have in Luke's gospel. When Mark tells a story of a particular healing, there's always just one person involved. And Mark has 13 of those stories. They stand out because it's just one single person. They stand out from a few comments about a bunch of healings being done where they don't mention who it is that got healed. So Mark has 13 of these. Now what happens if we list the healings by type? I've got 3 types in mind. When a limb is healed or a person is raised from sickness, let's call that a restoration. When a source of ceremonial uncleanness is healed, like leprosy, let's call that a cleansing. When a demon is cast out of a person, let's call that an exorcism. Notice demons are often, or in fact, at least every time I think they're at least once called unclean spirits in Mark's Gospel. There's a whole theology of cleansing behind that, which we're not going to get into, but I just thought I'd point that out. Read the book of Leviticus and come back to me. Anyway, so if we list these healings by type, it looks like a big bunch of nonsense. Here's all 13. Exorcism, restoration, cleansing, restoration, exorcism, cleansing, restoration, exorcism, restoration, exorcism, restoration. Okay. Why am I starting that way? Well, could there possibly be an order to this? I think we'll see it best if we start with the last 5. These are the last 5 healing restorations. It begins with the exorcism recorded in Mark 7:24 and following, the Syrophoenician woman's daughter. So if we take it from there, what we notice are some similarities and repeats. You have the exorcism of a child, the restoration of a deaf mute, and then you have the restoration of a blind man. That's the first 3. Then another exorcism, and it's an exorcism of a deaf-mute child. So the exorcism and the restoration that begin our series of 5 kind of get put together. And then the restoration of a blind man again. So you have the healing of a deaf-mute followed by the healing of a blind man. We could put these as 2 lines. If we say the exorcism begins the patterns, then you've got some pretty similar things going on. The exorcism begins it, then the restoration, and then the second line, the exorcism and the restoration are kind of merged together. You have virtually the same thing happening. Do you think that's coincidence? Now, remember that Mark selects anyone who reads the Bible has to believe this. Mark was not blogging. Mark was not writing stuff down as it came to him, or as it happened. He was not keeping a journal. This is not a video cam that's accompanying Mark or Jesus or the disciples or whatever. This is selection. John's Gospel says this. Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book. And of course, when John says that, he's not talking about just his book, because he goes on to say in the next chapter, now there are also many other things that Jesus did, were every one of them to be written, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that would be written. John 21:25. So, Mark has a bunch of things he could tell us, and he doesn't tell us them. He tells us what he wants to tell us. So we've got to ask why. What's the point? Why these miracles and not others? So, Mark chose these stories to tell. That's important to remember, and the question is why? Well, don't eyes complete ears and mouth for a healed head? I'm just going to throw that out as a hypothesis. we have a deaf mute being healed, and then a blind person being healed. So you have the complete, I realize the nose is missing from that, but I think still we have this obvious kind of completion of a healed head. So we could even designate the last restorations out from each line as a complement, as a completion of what's happened before. Exorcism, restoration of a deaf mute, then the restoration of a blind man. Restoration of a deaf mute child, then the restoration of a blind man. Whole head. Now what happens if we include the previous miracles? What we find is the pattern's been going on all along. Exorcism, restoration, cleansing, and the restoration to walk. The paralytic is told to walk in Mark 2, 1 through 10, I believe. And then, complementary restoration is the hand. The man with the withered hand is healed. Alright, then you have another exorcism. This is the demoniac who has the legion inside him that's thrown into the pig. Alright, the demons are cast out, and there's a cleansing and the restoration of a daughter. Now there is no complement to that. That's interesting. And then we get into the exorcism of a daughter and what we've already covered. So you have 4 lines here with a question, which is why isn't there one more restoration for the pattern to work? Well, it's actually not so mysterious. It actually makes a lot of sense, because if we look at this, why no completion in the second line? The first line, a paralytic is made to walk, and then hand is restored. So you got feet to hands. So you got a whole person restored, in a sense, in his body. Then we have no complement to the restoration of the second line. And then, of course, we have the deaf mute restored, then blind man restored. Ears, mouth to eyes. And we have ears, mouth to eyes in the 4th line, covering our 13 restorations. The point to remember is that the restoration of the daughter is not just a restoration. She doesn't have a fever, she's not just paralyzed, she's dead. She is a corpse. So when Jesus heals her, when Jesus raises her to new life, Mark is not going to be able to do what he did with the paralytic being made to walk. He's not going to be able to bring hands into it. He's not going to be able to do what he did with the 2 times he talked about a deaf mute being healed, where he follows it up with a blind man. Nothing can really follow, nothing can top, nothing needs to complete the raising of a girl from the dead. How do you complete a resurrection? So what if we call Jesus' resurrection the 14th healing? Because that's what happens at the end of Mark's gospel. If we do that, then we realize what Mark is doing by going from his body ailments he lists, the Simon's mother-in-law with a fever, the withered hand, etc., the paralytic who can't walk. That's Mark 1 through 6. Then, at the end of Mark 1 through 6, so yeah, it is, raise up the prone, restore to walk, restore withered hand. Okay, resurrection ends the body stories. How is he going to keep kind of moving, kind of building up to the resurrection of Jesus? He moves from body to head. Next come head restorations. Ears, mouths, and eyes. And the climax, as I said then, is the 14th healing, the resurrection of Jesus, the real resurrection. Presumably, Jairus' daughter has to die at some point, and Jesus does not. He enters into true immortality, which he will give to us the last day. So that's how it all works. And that's the end of part 1. Believe it or not, there's more to say about these patterns, and I will elaborate in our next little video. Please give me your feedback. I hope this was clear and presentable to you. I hope at some point to have better recording equipment so I can do this in a little bit higher quality. In the meantime, if you want to contact and give me some feedback, I would love that. handseyes.org/contact. Just go to handseyes.org and you'll see the contact tab at the top. You can buy my book if you want to, my exposition of the second gospel. There's the big long URL for it, but really you just look at under the books tab on my website and you'll see it right there. And also, if you would like to help me get better equipment for doing these things, I have a lot to do that I want to do. I'm just doing some real brief ones first. I mean, actually, I plan to keep them brief, but I really could do a lot more, and I could use some help. So if you have any inkling to do that, there's a donate tab as well. Well, there's been a presentation of hands and eyes. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. Have a blessed time, y'all. See you next time.